Are you an adventurer looking to take your hunt to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to East Meets West Hunt with your host, Bo Martonic.
Hey everyone, welcome back. And if this is your first time listening, welcome to the East Meets West Hunt podcast presented by onX. So what I want to talk about today in regards to onX is a specific layer under their trails and rec called Motor Vehicle Roads and Trails. So what this does is onX hosted roads and trail data from the United States Forest Service and their motor vehicle use maps showing which types of vehicles are allowed on each trail. And this layer is available for off-grid use. So what's cool about that is say you're going to hunt an area, whether that be out west or that be in, Pennsylvania, you can see any of these trails that are open to, say, ATVs or side-by-sides, and it even gives the details of, off-road vehicles less than 50 inches, so most likely going to be ATVs or smaller side-by-sides, or ones that are open to, regular vehicles, and also even to motorcycles and dirt bikes. So what that does is help you, one, see if you're able to take, one of those out if you have them to help aid in your hunting, or two, if you're on foot, maybe avoid those areas that that other people have a little bit of an advantage to. So I like to use that layer, as well as, in Pennsylvania specific, there's a layer that shows all the Pennsylvania deer hunting roads. So in Pennsylvania, we have roads that are open certain times of the year during hunting season, and they're gated the rest of the year. So if you're going to scout a spot and the gate's closed, you think you're getting way back in, hiking into the spot, scouting, and there's nobody there, and then you come hunting season, all of a sudden that gate's open. This knowledge can be really helpful to know ahead of time, so you know what you're getting into. So that, amongst many other layers, are a part of onX Hunt app that you can get at 20% off by using the code EMW. Check out more at onxmaps.com. In addition, Maven Optics. So I want to talk about Maven's C-Series binoculars. So this is their mid-level binoculars, and don't let that fool you. They're still a really great high-quality optic. So it's like a dynamic mid-range binocular that it's a good companion to their B-Series, which is their highest quality ones. Just like the dependable, like your pickup truck, this workhorse of a glass just gets the job done. It's, powerful, but has a well-balanced, lightweight polymer frame and also extra low dispersion glass, so ED glass. And the multi-coated lenses are exceptionally clear and bright and good in low light. They still come with the full warranty. And so there's a no-fault warranty on any of Maven's glass. So that can be really helpful, especially if you're like me and you're really hard on your gear, or sometimes just clumsy. So if you want to check out Maven Optics, go to mavenbuilt.com, use the code EastMeetsWest-gift to save yourself, what you'll get is a free gift, and that gift could be really anything, and it could be anything from a couple stickers to an Nalgene bottle, or a shirt, anything in between. It's kind of a mystery gift there. So in addition to that, the University of Elk Hunting and Corey Jacobson and Elk 101 have put together the most fully comprehensive elk hunting course available. It's getting to that time where it's a little bit, close to be using that for this hunting season, but it's never too late to, start, or too early, I guess, to get ready for the following year. And in addition to that, Corey is going to be launching the second series, the version 2 of Destination Elk, on their YouTube channel. If you go to their YouTube and watch the one from 2018, it's a day-by-day series of their hunts all through September in different states. And what's really cool about their series is they break down why they're doing certain things. And it's, a very educational piece as well. So if you're interested in the University of Elk Hunting, You can use the coupon code East Meets West to save yourself 20% off of the online course. And lastly, Heather's Choice. So Heather has come out with the highest quality meal options available, from breakfast to snacks to entrees, that are just gluten-free, high fat, high protein, high calorie fuel for your body. And that's what food is. It's fuel for you, especially in the backcountry, or, I like the little pack room snacks in the tree stands here in Pennsylvania as well. Keeps you fueled without having to pack in a whole lot of stuff. So if you want to check out Heather's Choice, you can go to heatherschoice.com, use the code EastMeetsWest to grab free shipping on any orders over $99. And just to give you a heads up, all this information on the partners is on the partners page on the website. So if you go to eastmeetswesthunt.com, click on the tab that says partners, and all the information is listed there as well. So you can find that. So on today's podcast, I have Josh Boyd coming on, and we're going to talk once again about elk hunting. But this podcast is a little bit different, where, Josh and I go into some topics. We wanted to cover some things that aren't talked about a whole lot on any podcast, and especially haven't been talked about on mine. So we're going to talk about, the differences with, hunting, in wet years versus dry years. We're going to talk about hunting in different terrains, different elevations, go into packing meat and the whole process of, once you have an elk down, butchering it and completely getting it out of the mountains, on your own. And so we're really trying to, cover some of these different avenues. And I really think the meat care part of it was a huge part of this podcast, and will really help out a lot of people. I know it helped me out with, making sure your coolers are prepared prior to getting in there, whether you have, a Yeti or Orion, or if you have a, Walmart Igloo, whatever it is. I really think that this will really help you out. So, like I said, Josh Boyd, he's from Northwest Montana. I've had him on the podcast here before. He's a great resource of information, has been, hunting for quite a while. So check out this episode and, let me know what you think. And I always encourage feedback, whether that's positive or negative. And if you do like it, head over to iTunes and give it a rating and review. That helps out so much for me in the podcast, so definitely check that out. And just one last note, as I'm 2 weeks out from leaving for my elk hunt in Idaho, and I have a mule deer tag as well, but then I'm going to transition into some hardcore mountain buck stuff. So I know a lot of listeners are interested in that aspect, and hunting whitetails and big timber, big forest, some gnarly terrain that we have all through the East Coast and the Appalachian Mountains. So that's going to be a big focus, and I'm really pumped to get into that, because that's my bread and butter. That's what I grew up doing. So I'm really excited to dive a lot deeper this year into talking about some of these things and getting ready for the whitetail season as well. So let's get into the podcast here with Josh Boyd. All right, we're back for another episode of the East Meets West Hunt podcast, and I have a guest returning here for the second time this year, Josh Boyd. What's going on, man?
Oh, just getting ready for the upcoming month of September. It's right around the corner.
Yeah, we're only about just a little over a week out from September, and we were talking before we got on here. It's just flying by.
Yeah, it is. It's and the crazy thing is, like, right now there's some states that are starting, like Utah is open for elk right now. It's been open for almost a week.
Mm-hmm.
So they're full into it right now for elk and archery. But Montana starts the 7th this year, and then I'm headed to Wyoming. It starts on the 1st, but I'm not heading down there till the 13th.
Okay.
So
you'll get
yeah.
about a week or about a week in Montana before you head down there then.
Yeah, I'll hunt that opening weekend and extend the weekend out a little bit to maybe I might do like a 5-day trip.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when I'm hunting in Montana, I always try to do like a backpack style hunt. And then I'll come back and kind of recoup, resupply, put in a couple more days of work, and then I'll probably be gone for the rest of the month.
Yeah, that's not too bad. So did you you drew a tag in Wyoming then this year?
I did, yes. It's a general elk, but those are becoming fairly highly sought after. It seems like it took several preference points to pull that tag, and that's in the regular general. The odds are a little better if you fork over money for the higher dollar tag. I think it took last year maybe 1.5 or 2 points to draw that. This year might have been 2 points for the special general, but the regular general it took 3.
Huh.
So,
yeah, what is it? Like an extra like $700 or something like that? It's something crazy.
Yeah, it might be another 600. It almost doubles it, but not quite.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a chunk of change, and if guys, it increases your odds considerably. If you want to hunt it, Wyoming, more often than not, it's probably a good strategy.
Yeah, and so what we're talking about is there's 2 different ways of applying in Wyoming, and correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, I haven't applied for it, but there's the general and the special general draw, if those terms are right. But basically, if you pay more for the one, you have better odds. Is that kind of a quick and easy way to explain it?
Yep. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it just takes fewer preference points to get that special general.
Okay.
And the regular general, it takes a little more points. You got to wait a little longer to accumulate those points to draw it. So
I just bought my first point in Wyoming this year, and everyone was basically kicking me in the ass about it. I had a deer point there, and for some reason last year I didn't buy an elk point, and talking to some people, they're like, you should definitely consider getting a couple points there, and then applying for a general hunt.
Yeah, the nice thing with Wyoming is that they do allow you to just straight up buy the point for, I want to say it's $50.
Yeah, it is.
And you can buy them up to, I think, maybe, don't quote me on it, it's in October. I think it's the end of October. You're allowed to buy a point for the next year's draw.
Yep, so October 31st.
Yeah. So if people want to get a point, they still can.
Yeah.
But yeah, you got to start somewhere. If you don't have any, just buying one for $50 it's not. I mean, if you need 3 points to draw a regular general, it's not that much extra money. So
yeah. And I guess the way I figured it is, like, for me personally, next year I'll be hunting Alaska in September, most likely for caribou. So I don't know if I'll get an elk hunt in, and I'm like, that'll give me 2 points there, and as you go through, I'll be gaining some points and also building in other states too. So, in the next few years, I should start to actually draw a couple tags maybe.
Nice.
So.
Yeah. I consider it an investment in fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Is that how you have to explain it to the family?
Yeah. I usually don't have to explain a whole lot, but yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, that's funny. So, Josh, you're up in northwestern Montana is where you call home. And if anyone wants to know a little bit more about Josh's background specifically, the first podcast we did about mountain whitetails, you've really dove into, some his work life and everything else. So you work in the woods, in the mountains, basically every day, correct?
Yeah, I'm outside. Probably I would say 80% of my time spent at work. More in the summer, spring, summer, fall than winter, but I'm still out a fair bit in the winter. But yeah, I'm out in the mountains, in the river channels, small stream channels, headwater basins, all summer, spring, summer, and fall, working. In the field, I work in the field of hydrology, so it's a good excuse to get out and about.
Yeah.
And look at some stuff. Yeah.
So how's the weather been there this year so far?
It's been a really mild summer. We had a late spring. We had decent snowpack. It wasn't extremely deep snow like it was in the rest of the West. We were a little anomaly in this part of the world. In the northwest corner, we were a little low on the snowpack, but we seemed like we kind of made up for it with just the slow melt off and lots of spring and summer rain. It's been a really cool summer. So everything here is really still relatively green. We've been getting just enough moisture coming through and to keep the fires down. We haven't had any smoke out here at all this year, so the fires must not be doing a whole lot elsewhere in the country to the west of us. A lot of times we'll get smoke from Washington, Oregon, so I'm assuming that they're kind of in a similar situation. But here in western Montana, North Idaho, it's fairly lush still. So way different than the last few years that we've experienced.
Yeah, I remember the last time we talked, it was in the winter, but we were talking about the previous year a little bit and how dry it was compared to what we're experiencing this year. Yeah,
I would say, let's see, like the summer of 2015 was one of our driest on record. We had the lowest snowpack probably on record in some of the sites that I measure, and some of those data set go back to like 1929, I believe. So we had some of the lowest measurements for snowpack in 2015, and then we had really hot, dry weather that summer. 2016 was a little more normal. 2017 again was a super droughty year. Lots of trees were just dying of drought, especially the little fir trees that were growing in around bedrock outcrops and stuff. You'll see them turning orange and dying just from the lack of moisture. But in 18 was pretty dry as well. I mean, it wasn't a great wet year. So, and we had a fairly warm summer, but this year was definitely on the cooler side, way more wet. So it's going to be a different scenario out there in the elk woods, I think, this year than the last, say, 4.
What does that change as far as when it comes to elk hunting, as far as, I'm sure, like the food sources and everything a little bit, but can you kind of explain a little bit of what the wet years will bring for you and how you change a little bit?
Yeah. So the wet delayed, the big snowpacks, they typically melt off later in the spring. So the green up occurs a little later. So a lot of times those elk don't migrate back up to the tops of the mountains until a little later in the season. So they're just a little bit of a lag before they get up there. So they haven't spent as much time up on top. And so they haven't eaten a lot of their preferred food. So there's just abundant food up high for them usually in these big wet years. And also when you get the rains coming through, it keeps things continually wet and continually growing and not drying out, and the nutrition is available in their forage up there. So the wetter years, it tends to scatter them a little more. Another thing that kind of concentrates them on a drier year would be water. So
yeah.
Now in a wet year, there's more available water as well. So they're a little more spread out. And they're just a little harder to find sometimes. Just takes a little more hiking. Sometimes you got to climb up the mountain another couple thousand feet or, 1,000 feet. So yeah, the wet years are great, I think, for herd health and raising those calves, just because it's just so much abundant food. Makes it a little harder on the predators to find them and eat them. And that goes for us as well.
I was just going to say, including hunters.
Yep. Yeah. So I think I've noticed they just tend to be a little more scattered around when it's wet. So you have to cover a little bit more country, and just pay attention to the sign that you're seeing out there on the landscape. Some of it might be kind of old and they've just moved, even further up the mountain. And so you just kind of have to poke around until you find some good quality, fresh sign, and find what they prefer.
Yeah.
But once that's the nice thing. Once you find them, you can stick with them.
Okay. But with you though, where you're hunting at specifically in Montana, it's pretty thick. So are you able to do much glassing at all?
No, it's not. This isn't really a great glassing area. Other parts of the state are decent. Mm-hmm. You can glass a lot of stuff. Here, it's so thick and so brushy. There's openings you'll see them in. You might see them in a clear cut or avalanche chute, or just a big brush field on the opposite hillside. That helps for sure. Definitely. There's a lot of people I know say they don't really pack binoculars with them when they're bow hunting for elk, but there's enough to look around at that I always have a set of binocs with me. But I'm not a die-hard elk glasser like a lot of guys in the desert Southwest are, or even on the east side of Montana. There's a lot of guys that will just climb up on a knob and just glass and glass and glass, and then find where they're moving to and intercept them. Mm-hmm. So up here, hey, you can see them, but you're not going to go stalk over there and sneak in on one.
Yeah.
Just because you saw one in a brush field, that's not going to happen. You might get lucky and it could happen, but boy, the chances are low. So for me, it's a calling game for sure in the big woods, big mountains up here. I'll just find a receptive bull and try to call them in.
Yeah.
But that's another thing that it seems to me that I found. It could be just specific to the part of the state that I live in, but it seems like when it's really wet and there's lots of food available, it seems like the rut's not as intense. And I don't know if it's because the elk aren't like concentrated in those hot food sources and hot little water holes. And they're all packed together and they get all antsy and get each other all worked up and they're more vocal, or it's just the weather just sort of makes them a little more mellow and it just doesn't seem to be as intense. Overall. You can have some really intense days, on any year, but it seems like I have better luck when it's hot and dry.
Wow.
Especially calling bulls in the midday. How you can get some bulls just cranking in the middle of the day.
That's interesting. And it's kind of almost different from, I guess I never asked these questions before, but, when I talked to some other people like, oh, it's a wet year, and mostly they refer that to antler growth and, herd health and stuff, but haven't dug into the actual specifics of that. And it makes sense. There's water everywhere. There's food everywhere, Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like they can be more mobile at times. Mm-hmm. And it seems they might not bump into other competitive bulls. And so they can just kind of be more spread out, I guess, across the landscape spatially. So, it's still going to be good. It's still going to be fun. Mm-hmm. But I'll be curious to see what September turns into. Typically, I look into the long-term forecast that the Weather Service kicks out. They'll give a prediction 1 month out, 2 months out, 3 months out. I haven't looked. I want to say the last time I looked was like late June, and they were predicting a fairly warm warm and dry September. So the effects of the water and the food sources could be diminished by the time September rolls around. It's kind of hard to say. It's hard to predict that, but if that holds true, it could be a pretty good rut this year.
Okay, well that's interesting, and I'll be, interested to see as far as like you're talking about them going higher, going up for those green food sources and everything a little bit higher up on the mountain. Do you see them? Do they stay there through all of September normally? Does that depend on different outliers, or when do they start kind of moving back down?
It really does depend. That's a weasel answer, but it really does depend on the weather. If you get a really early hard frost, sometimes it could kill off their preferred food at that time, and they'll just completely switch over to something different, which is growing at either a different elevation or a different aspect on the mountain. And so they might drop down in elevation a little bit, or sometimes they'll be in these pockets, these really deep, dark basins that are kind of cold sinks. A lot of the cold air will sink in there, and they'll get a really hard frost in those pockets. And it'll kill off a lot of their really highly valuable, highly nutritious forbs in there. And when those are done, then they might migrate up a little bit onto the slopes that didn't get frost killed. But if it stays wet, doesn't freeze, things kind of stay fairly static for, a couple of weeks, it seems like, especially around that peak of the rut. But it seems like that really hot or that really hard, cold frost can change what they prefer to eat.
Yeah. And no, I kind of figured that was going to be your answer with it, because it seems like elk will do what elk want to do. And each area is so different, depending on, so many different outliers. And again, this is just me from looking at it kind of from an outside perspective. I haven't had enough experience to be able to correlate anything, but that's interesting. And so with that, like, so when you're going to be going to locate the elk this year, with being a little wetter and everything, are you going to let's jump over to Wyoming, because have you been to this spot before, or is it brand new to you?
This is all brand new. Yeah.
Okay. So what does it look like for you going into this spot brand new? Like, what are you doing to go in there and locate the elk?
So where we're headed, it's going to be kind of western Wyoming. It's broken country, big mountains, fairly large drainages. There's a lot of open ground in there. I will definitely be glassing a lot. I will, what I like to do is pick, once I kind of narrow in on an area that I want to hunt, I will identify some major high spots with some decent vantage points, and I'll climb to the top of the highest high spot and plunk my butt down and glass everything around me, just to get an idea of what's moving where. And there's a lot of times I'll see something 4 miles away. It's like, oh, there's elk over there, and plan to go hunt those maybe another day. Just pack up and head that way. But so my plan is to get there. I want to be mobile. I'm going to have a mobile camp at my truck. A couple of friends are heading down there with me, so we're all going to be kind of in the same situation. We're going to be set up to have a base camp set up, sort of maybe at the truck or close to the truck, but also we're set to go backpack in and bivy hunt, for 4 to 5 nights. Mm-hmm. Maybe come back out, reset or relocate if something happens, something's not going according to plan. We run into a dead end, or predators move into the basin or something like that. So we can reset or relocate and cruise down the road and go to plan B, site number 2 or 3 or whatever it happens to be. So I try to stay light on my feet, light on my base camp as well. I don't pull a trailer. I don't pull a camper. I just tent camp out of the back of my truck. I'll have all the amenities that can slide in and out of the back, and I can roll out in the dark if I need be, and relocate and take off. So that's going to be kind of my plan, is to stay light, glass, and then go hunt deep if I have to. I don't necessarily have to hunt deep if they're not deep. And I just kind of roll with the punches. I try to be super flexible.
Yeah.
Because there's always elk. I mean, there could be elk even where I live here in Montana. There's elk, within a half a mile of my house, and I live down the valley bottom, so I don't have to go climb up to the top of the mountain and be 5 miles in. I just prefer to hunt that way.
Yeah.
But it sounds like this place is going to be, the hunting pressure is going to be moderate. Not going to be, super crazy. But you never know. I'll just kind of roll with the punches, I guess.
Yeah. So when you were scouting ahead of time, do you have a bunch of different areas kind of picked out for that? All right, maybe there's more pressure than you expected near the roads and you're going to have to go back in. Then, you already have that kind of ahead of time planned, that this is, scouted. So you have somewhat of an idea.
Yeah. I'll have base camps, car camps kind of pre-located. Okay, if we're going to hunt this basin system or this drainage system, we could, park trucks here, camp here. We could do a quick little day trip in there to explore it. And if it doesn't really pan out, we'll bump over to site number 2, camp there, kind of do the same thing. But if site number 1 is, full of critters, then and if we think it's necessary to backpack in, then we definitely will.
Yeah. Yep, I understand. And with the base camp thing, so that's kind of the strategy that I'm looking at this year, is mostly truck camping, but having the ability to go in if we need to. Again, same thing, depending on the scenario. And again, just learning from the last couple of years, I would just find an area and I'd backpack in right off the bat, and and there wouldn't, if there wasn't elk there, or say that we blew them out of that spot, then it took a little bit to go back and regroup, and I'm just going to be more organized and ready to go and kind of move as needed. And the problem I'm running into right now is, and actually meeting with the guys I'm going with this weekend, is trying to figure out how I'm going to fit everything in my truck for 3 guys.
Yeah.
And we're I literally looked up U-Haul's areas in the area, just saying we all 3 of us end up tagging out, which is a good problem to have, but we're going to need to get a trailer to go home, because we're going to be packed to the roof of my cap of my truck before even getting anything,
Yeah. Yep. Well, hopefully you're full of antlers and meat on the way out of there.
Yeah, we said
awesome.
That's a good problem to have. If you're trying to figure out how to fit all the meat and antlers in your truck, I think that's something I'm hoping is a problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
So no, that's cool to hear that that's kind of your style with it, and you and I had talked a little bit, and the area that I'm going to is similar, with some more open country that I'm used to, and that was kind of the strategy, is trying to find some of them high points and glassing, and then hopefully locating them and going from there. So what if once you locate elk, or say you find a bull that you want to go after, I'm not sure what your goals are with it, as far as if you're going for a certain size, you're going for or whatever, but what's your strategy look like once you find the elk to actually go in and kill them?
So yeah, it's going to be definitely all spotting and stock hunting for bulls. It works fairly well. I don't have a ton of experience doing it. I mean, I've done it a few times over kind of in central Montana, where I used to spend a lot more of my elk season. And so it definitely works. It works well, especially for big bulls. But I like to call it elk. So, find a bull that's receptive and and try to call them in.
Mm-hmm.
And usually when you find a little herd of elk, there's usually more than one bull around. So goal is get in on them, call them, shoot them, pack them out, get them to the meat locker.
That's simple.
So, I mean, if they're not responsive, then yeah, we're definitely going to be flexible in our strategies as well. Sitting over water, it works really well in certain areas. In certain years, it'll work. I just don't have a lot of patience for it. I like to cruise. I like to cover country. Part of the fun of hunting for me is exploring new ground. It's the adventure of it. And you're not exploring new ground if you're sitting in a tree stand over a water hole or sitting in a ground blind. To me, it's just monotonous, and it's not as much fun. So I would rather spend my time looking over new country, hiking through new country, cruising ridges, trying to get a bull to respond, or finding some vocal elk if they just bugle on their own. That's awesome. So we'll definitely be flexible, but probably fallback plan would be interception or spot and stalk kind of a deal. Or a lot of times, spot, stalk, and then call. If you can sneak in on them really dang close and then make a few little subtle squeaks, you can get them right in your lap with very little effort.
I guess my question would be is, when you're going to move in, say even a call on them, are you waiting until they get into the timber to bed?
It kind of depends. If it's early in the morning and they're moving towards their bedding area, no, I will definitely harass them. I'll harass them all the way to their bedding area, if possible. Very carefully. Yeah, I definitely don't want to blow them out of there. Once you locate them and there's definitely a bull or two around that you really would like to hang your tag on, you don't want to blow them out of the country. I don't know how. With these Wyoming elk, I'm not 100% sure how far they would move if you did that. I've bumped elk that don't go all that far in certain areas, but other places they'll locate to the next county. So I want to be careful not to bump them. And if everything looks good and I know where they're bedded, I will hunt the bedding area very carefully, very selective. If the wind's really, really steady, really calm, and I've got it in my advantage or in my favor, I'll try to call a bull out of his bedding area. If he has a ton of cows in a small patch of timber, maybe not. Sneaking in there, getting close enough to call might not be the best idea. Without you might get busted or pinned down by a cow, but it could work really well. Or you could just pre-position and try to ambush them when they get up and head out in the afternoon or evening. But yeah, bedding areas are tricky because you can get a bull in your lap in just a matter of a minute, or you can blow the whole herd over the mountaintop, Yeah. You got to hike out and relocate 5 miles away.
Yeah. Okay. That's kind of what I was wondering. So like your preferred method is, you see them and you're moving right then after you spot them.
Yeah. Yeah. I try to figure out what they're doing, where they're going, what their next move is, and then try to intercept them a little bit and kind of get pre-positioned. But if it's early in the morning, that's a great opportunity to get a bull to come. I think they seem to be, active, and they're still excited from that night where they were out romping around chasing cows, and other bulls were bugling, and they're just a little bit more of a frenzy versus, middle of the day is good too, though. I mean, it's hard to compare the two because I've had some midday hunts that are just unreal, where a bull just would not, he'd go to bed, but he just wouldn't stop bugling. And I just would sneak in. I've done it several times. I snuck in, a couple of little subtle calls, and just either get him getting up looking for that lost cow. And if he doesn't really respond, then I'll challenge him with a bugle, and they'll just come running in. Some of my best bulls I've killed in the middle of the day. After I've kind of got them out of their bed and they've gotten worked up after their cows have been bedded down.
Yeah. Okay. And so
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. When you're going in, as far as let's talk about like your bivy camp setups and everything. Do you have like a certain type of terrain you're looking to set up camp in? Are you trying to be lower than where you perceive the elk are going to be, or where you're going to glass? Are you going to camp right up on the ridge? What's that kind of look like?
Yeah. So when I'm bivy hunting, backpack hunting, I am typically, just so your listeners kind of are on the same page that I am. I mean, when I say bivy hunting, that means I am packing up camp and I'm taking it with me every day. So I'm not leaving my camp in a spot. I would consider that more of a spike camp, or maybe even a base camp if you're coming back to that thing for 4 or 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm bivy hunting, I'm mobile and I'm just following the nomadic herds. So middle of the day, I'm just kind of hanging out with my full pack on, waiting for the move for the evening. If I don't have an evening play, then I will back off and I'll throw up camp and kind of get situated for the evening and the next morning. But I'm doing it in a way where it's kind of that fine edge you kind of have to walk. There's this little razor's edge. It's like you want to be close to the elk so you can hear what they're doing at night, but you don't want to be so close that they're going to bump into your camp and get buggered in the middle of the night. Or you don't want them to end up feeding, down slope of you, which they're going to catch your down slope wind and know that you're there in the middle of the night and blow them out. But you also kind of want to be fairly close so you can keep tabs on them.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to pick a spot that's, I don't know, sometimes it's tough. Sometimes you're just sleeping in a tiny little mule deer bed on the side of a hill. But a lot of times you can back off, get up, find a little bench or a little flat spot on top of a ridge. I try not to go down into the creek bottoms if possible, just because they tend to be cold and wet, and they're also noisy. With the creek babbling next to you, sometimes you can't hear a lot what's going on, because that's one of the things I like. I'll try to be really quiet around camp, not a lot of banter back and forth if you have a partner with you, because I like to listen and hear what's going on. And you can hear bulls potentially that you might not have heard if you're flapping your gums with your buddy playing Farkle.
Yeah. Well, it's funny
camp.
how you say that, because I remember the first year when I backpacked into the spot, and it wasn't out of really any knowledge, but I camped on this ridge, but I camped kind of off the side a little bit, kind of down on the first bench, and I was hearing bugles all night from the opposite down in the little, it was like a little drainage, like a smaller one that was steep. But if we were camped on that side of the ridge, then our, the downwind drafts, the thermals might have blew them out. I don't know. But we were camped on the opposite side, which helped, and we heard them all night bugling. And then we moved a couple days later, we ran out of light. We were down in kind of a creek bottom and some dark timber and set up there. And you're right, you couldn't hear a thing down there. It was terrible, because we were too close to the creek, and it was not ideal whatsoever from that standpoint. But again, I guess that's all learning.
Yeah, and not only that, is it's also that's where the heaviest dews and frosts occur at night. So you wake up in the morning and everything's covered in a heavy dew and it's wet. I don't know. And if you want to pack your shelter up in the dark before you head off in that morning, and everything's soaking wet, it's not ideal. I mean, I will do it. Don't get me wrong. If I would camp in a creek bottom to keep elk from smelling me every time, if that was my only option, but I'd prefer to be up out of the creek bottom or out of those basins, just because of the fact that they're just not the best camping spots.
Yeah. Okay.
So, The ridge tops are typically a little drier, but they can also be windier as well. And if they're really windy, you might not be able to hear bugles from the ridge tops either. So if you can camp off the leeward side of a ridge, and you can hear a little better as well. And plus, you don't want to be skyline. If it's an open country, you don't want to have your big yellow tent stuck up on top of this big open ridge line where everything feeding out on the opposite hillside can look across and see that beacon glowing, in the late evening rays, or even in the morning if you're leaving your camp set up. So I try to be as discreet as possible when I'm around elk and I'm camping kind of near them.
Well, and it's funny because like when you see like people taking photos and everything of their tent set up, a lot of times they have them in these, big open spots, probably more just for the picture than anything. Right. I'm like, wow, that thing sticks out like a sore thumb. That's my thought.
Yeah, there's nothing that'll ruin your hunt is better than like pitching your tent in the middle of the meadow where the elk want to come feed.
Yeah.
That's a surefire way to hear nothing in the morning when you get up.
Well, and I'm sure it's location specific, but I remember when I had that one camp set up on the ridge and I moved up probably about 500 yards and set up a little higher, closer to tree line. And the wind was so much worse up there in the middle of the night. That's when I learned about making sure to put rocks on my stakes, because I had a floorless shelter and they all started pulling out in the middle of the night from a really bad storm. And that was something I do not want to experience again. I'm like holding down the corners of my tent with my body, hoping I don't
Yep.
lose it, because if you lose your shelter, you're in some trouble.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's a good way to, I'd rather not spend my nights, trying to secure my gear as it's flowing around.
I did buy 4 stakes. So I'm using one of those Seek Outside Cimarron teepee shelters, and when I have a couple guys staying in there, and so for 4 of the stake points, my brother actually got them for me one year. They're like the MSR. They're the longer ones that screw in, kind of. They're a little bit heavier. Yeah. They're still aluminum, but man, I feel so much more secure with that.
Yep. Yeah, the MSR stakes are awesome. Yeah, I know which one you're talking about. I can't remember the model name.
Yeah.
But yeah, what are those called? But anyway, I have a Cimarron as well.
Okay.
And I love that shelter. That thing is awesome.
It is.
I use it a lot. Especially if you've got a couple guys with you, or the weather's going to be kind of nasty. It's great.
The one year I packed a stove in with me and did that, and man, was that nice having the stove in there, because we got 6 inches of snow and it was cold and windy, and just being able to run a little bit of heat in there. That was nice, drying off your gear. I mean, you got to be careful with condensation inside the tent, but still, it was pretty neat.
Yep. Yeah, it is. They're awesome. Yep. I've got a little stove with mine as well. And I'll switch to that. I have used it in early September, especially if it's rainy. Mm-hmm. Up here in North Idaho and western Montana, we have so much underbrush. Even if it rains 3 hours in the middle of the night and stops, you're still getting soaked in that brush. So it's nice to have a tent, teepee you can come back into at night, pull your wet pants off, pull your wet socks, get them somewhat dry. You can eat in there in a t-shirt when it's super cold out. They're amazing. I just can't say enough good things about those shelters. I mean, I used one last year in Utah, my Utah elk hunt. I was camping down there. I went down like 5 days early to scout, and it was cold, high desert. It was getting down to like the lowest it got down to when I was there was like 3. So it was like, I'd wake up in the morning and I'd look at the thermometer, it'd be like 7 one day, 9, 5, 3. It's like, what is going on now? This is freezing. And so that wood stove was it was a necessity, really, for me.
Yeah. And your boots, and drying out your boots in the morning, we wouldn't run the stove all night. Just, when we get back, warm up a little bit, get in our sleeping bag.
Yeah.
And then in the morning, just for even 20 minutes before you get up and get moving as you're cooking, say breakfast or whatever, and getting your boots warmed up a little bit and making sure you don't put them too close, but just, to dry them out a little bit, because there's nothing worse than putting on a frozen boot. Oh,
I hear it. I hear you.
Yeah, that sucks. Yeah, because it never seems to dry the whole day then. But
yeah, I don't know if you ever use these. I use these little tabs. Oh, I'm forgetting the name of them now. They're like a little military surplus tab.
Little Espit tablets? Oh, no.
Yeah, they're a little fire starter that I use for trioxane, I think is what they're called.
Yep.
You can buy a case of them on Amazon for next to nothing. But man, those things are awesome for starting a little fire in those stoves. They just throw a half of a tab in there, throw your kindling on top of it, and just light it. Boom, you've got instant fire.
Yeah, and like I use those little, they're called Espit tablets. They're white, and they come in like maybe 12 packs or something, but I'll take a few of them with me and just throw one of them in there with the kindling, and those light so good. I mean, it's worth having those with you for that. Even if you don't have a stove, even just starting a fire, they're just so much easier to get things rolling. And one mistake I guess I made the first year I was taking a stove, I overthought it too much, and I was like, oh, I need an axe and I need all this stuff, and I carried it all in, and most of the time I'm not sure of everywhere, but all the sticks were dry enough I was able to break them off and didn't need an axe for anything.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And those stoves, you can't burn really big chunks of wood anyway in them, it doesn't seem like. So yeah, cutting big logs to throw in there really isn't going to help you a whole lot.
And when did you notice, I don't know about the country you were in, but when I was camping in Pennsylvania and it was really cold, it was down probably around 10 degrees, and I was burning a lot of like hemlocks and pine tree branches and stuff like that. Make sure and it's cold like that, you have that damper wide open for most of it, or close to being open, because I had it where I started closing off, bring some heat, and it plugged up, and actually the stovepipe caught on fire inside.
Really?
Yeah, and it back. So it did that, and then the whole inside of the tent filled up with smoke because it plugged with the creosote, basically. And I wouldn't have woke up. I probably would have died. My brother was with me, and he woke up twice, and he's like, he goes, I shook you and you weren't waking up. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper. But the whole tent was filled with smoke, and it wasn't a very, good night's sleeping. I learned a little bit there as far as when you're burning some of that softwood in cold temperatures. But it's just something you kind of learn. Open. Yep. But I don't know. I guess I kind of got on a little bit of a tangent there, switching from September to late.
Oh, that's easy to do.
That's funny. But no, I'm glad to hear kind of your camp set up like that. That's interesting. And is that what you're using for bivy hunting too, or are you using a different tent?
Sometimes I'll use that sometimes for bivy hunting. In the past, I've used just tarps occasionally. Mm-hmm. I got like a Jimmy tarp. I've got one of the new Sitka tarps. I've pitched that before, but also this year I'm going to use that Stone Glacier Sky Air Ultra tarp. It's like a little single person, kind of a shaped tarp. It's more of like a trapezoid, and you pitch it with trekking poles. It's got like I don't know if you're familiar with like the Kafaru super tarps.
Yep.
But it's similar in shape to that, maybe a little smaller. It's really lightweight, really packable. I mean, it's like with the little ground sheet, which is pretty sweet, by the way. The ground sheet's awesome. And if anybody's interested in picking up that shelter, definitely get the vestibule and get the ground sheet. But ground sheet, vestibule, tent body plus stakes, it's like barely over a pound. I mean,
really?
It's definitely less than a pound and a half, yeah. And it packs down to something, I don't know, size of a large grapefruit.
Yeah.
Something maybe a little bigger than that. But it's super compact, which lightweight's great and all, but compact is ideal as well, just because I eat just volume, and the more trim your pack is when you're cruising around with a full pack on your back, the better things are going to be. You don't want a giant pack sticking way above your head as you're crawling through the brush or the blowdown.
Yeah.
So
man,
lightweight's great. Compactness is just as good.
That's a good point. I mean, that's the only thing about that Cimarron shelter, with the way that the teepee part is on the top and the stovepipe port, it doesn't pack down as small as, you probably like with it. It's not terrible or anything, but that's interesting. I've looked into the tarp setups and just haven't pulled the trigger. I almost bought one last year, and I just saw that Stone Glacier one on Go Hunt's website. They put it up in their gear shop, and I was just checking it out, and that seems like a pretty legit setup. Yeah,
I mean, tarps, they're not for everyone. I mean, you kind of have to have a little bit of an advanced skill set to run them into the colder, wetter seasons. And also, they're not for every season either. I mean, that's just straight up the way it is. There's trade-offs for that lightweight packability, and it's a more mild weather, not super windy country, fairly dry, occasional rain, but it's a pretty versatile shelter for September, I think, in most places in the West.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't take it to Alaska.
Yeah.
It's just not going to hold up in any high winds or just, 3 days of solid rain. I would not want to be in that thing. But it's, I took it up to British Columbia this summer in late July, early August. I was up there for 2 weeks on a backcountry canoe trip, and it rained almost every day there. And I slept in that thing a few times, and it did great. So it will handle some weather. And then we had a really windy night too, one night, and it just pounded us. And that thing, it held up pretty well.
Huh. That's interesting. Like you said, I've never did that. And like you said about like shelters are different for everyone. Like, I mean, I tried one of those, Nemo Spike Storm 1-person tents, really small, compact, lightweight, set it up with trekking poles and basically an arrow shaft on the front. And it wasn't for me. Like, it's a nice tent, and I know a lot of people really like them. But for me, I just felt claustrophobic in it, and that's
right.
Where I thought maybe like a tarp would be better because you're, more open in it, where that tent was just too tight for me. And that's, again, all personal preference. Like, I mean, I was talking to Brady Miller, who's about 8 inches taller than me, and he's using the same one, and he loves it. He liked it a lot. And I just...
Does he really?
Yeah. I couldn't get used to it. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I know Brady, and he's built of, he's just got a different mental state than a lot of people. That guy, like, I've looked at his early season mule deer meal plans, and it's all like cold food.
Yeah.
And if I remember right,
it is
like protein shakes and stuff like that. Like, man, I need a little bit more comfort than that.
Yeah.
So, but like you said, it's all what you're into and all what you're willing to sacrifice. So, and some people, that's just not a big deal. It's like, oh, why would you even have a concern about that?
Yeah, that's the same thing.
They just roll with
it. The food thing, I looked at his list and the same thing. I'm like, man, that would be great, not carrying a stove, but wow, like that's rough for that many days.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know Kurt Roscoe of Stone Glacier. Do you know Kurt at all?
No, I don't.
He's just a diehard, just savage, and I heard him on another podcast talking about how he'll just pour water into his mountain house, cold water into his mountain house in the morning, and then just that way it's ready, it's hydrated by dinner time. so he doesn't have to heat up water. So he's just in cold mountain house while he's, solo hunting sheep in the Absarokas.
No, because for me, that would be, especially doing something like that, a sheep hunt where it's already, so taxing on your body and stuff. A little bit of comfort of a warm meal makes me feel so much better.
Yeah. But I've had some pretty decent conversations with Kurt, and he's just cut from a different cloth as well. He's just one of those guys that, it's not suffering to him. It's just normal, everyday. This is what you do.
Yeah.
Kind of a deal.
Huh. So
I would say if you're that way, if you have that personality, the tarp setup is might be the way to go for you.
Huh. Yeah, that's it. And I guess that's where it comes to, practicing with it. And I guess sometimes it'll take a little bit of investment to figure out what you want and what you need. But if something doesn't work out, you can always resell it too.
That's right. Yeah, no, absolutely. There's always a market for it. Someone will jump on and snatch it up. I know the classifieds on Rockslide are just full of shelters and backpacking gear that people just aren't into using or don't need anymore or whatever. So that's another route. If you want to try it, you can maybe get into it a little cheaper by buying something lightly used somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Rockslide is definitely the best place that I've found for used gear that you can get quality stuff, and there's a good selection on there from people, posting up stuff.
Yeah. Yep. If you want backpacking or backcountry type of gear, definitely, I would say check out Rockslide in the classified section.
Cool. And so Josh, one a little bit of a different route here that I wanted to kind of dive into here with you is when it comes to, you have a bull down and you got that, you took your photos with it, everything's good to go. Now what's it look like when it comes to, your meat care and, meat packing? So is there any steps that you're taking, off the bat to make sure that everything's good?
Yeah. So in my mind, that's one of the most important things we do as hunters is take care of our meat, especially elk meat. I mean, it's just incredible. So, and it seems like if you're willing to spend the time and want to work a little bit harder at keeping things clean, it's just, everything's going to be easier in the long run. And it's just going to taste better too. You're going to be more apt to pull it out of the freezer, late in the winter and thaw it out and cook it up with some pride. So that starts, like you said, right after you kill one. Elk, sometimes they die where it's flat and open and grassy, and that's awesome. I mean, count yourself lucky that happened and take it all in, because the chances of it happening again are pretty slim. They tend to die. They tend to die in some nasty, dark, brush hole, blow down, steep mountainside. At least the ones I kill end up that way. Not all of them. Sometimes I get lucky and they'll die in a great spot. But, especially if you're by yourself, it's a lot of work. There's just no way around it. No matter what method you use, a lot of guys use gutless. A lot of guys gut. I do both. It depends on the situation, where I'm at, how far it is to the truck. In an ideal situation for me, I would prefer to gut that thing and quarter it, especially when I'm by myself. It's just easier to handle those big bulls and kind of slide them around and jockey them into position to make the cuts if the guts are out of them. There's, some people might disagree with that, but that's fine. Gutless, I've used a ton as well, and I've used the gutless method when the bull is in such a nasty place, I can't budge him. So I just got to start taking it apart chunk by chunk. Usually the top side comes off first. So, I'll skin the top half of the animal off. I'll pull the back straps out, or one of the backs, the upside back strap. I'll pop the hind quarter off at the ball joint. I'll pull that front shoulder off. I'll take the neck meat off. That way you got a lot less weight to jockey around, and you might be able to move it around and get it out from underneath the blowdown or wherever it happens to be in this little stump hole or wherever it died. And then just roll it, try to flop it over the best you can, and then do the same thing on the opposite side. So if I can get the quarters off with the bone in them, I prefer that. I like to hang them up. I'll take a few minutes and I'll make a little makeshift game pole between two trees. Sometimes if you're in the desert or you're in a place where it's just sagebrush or juniper or something like that, you might not have the option, but you can still hang them up and tie them to a limb, a tree limb or something. Then I like to get them up off the ground. I like to get them into the shade. I like to get air flowing around them, and I like getting them cooled off as soon as possible. If you bone them out right away and just drop the big chunks of meat in the bottom of a game bag and throw some more meat on it, you just tend to get a giant ball of meat that never really dries out, never really airs out and cools off properly. So I like, if I can get away with it, I'll pull the quarters off and I'll hang them on a meat pole and I'll let them cool off overnight, or at least for several hours if possible, before I bone them. But if I'm going to leave them on the bone, I'll make a little slit and I'll open the meat up to the bone. A butcher friend of mine showed me that years and years ago. He's like, that bone is really dense and it holds a lot of heat, and it's right in the middle, surrounded, insulated with all this meat. You need to get it exposed to the air. So just make a little slit down to that bone, and then you can just kind of pry it open and expose a part of that bone to some air to get that heat coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And a good rule of thumb for me is an elk's going to continue to cool off for about 12 to 18 hours, depending on the time that you kill it. So you kill it in the morning. Even if it's going to get warmer in the day, that elk is still going to cool off because, the internal body temperature on a bull is like 101 degree. So as soon as you kill him, he's going to start cooling off. Even if it's 80 degrees off, it's still cool. I mean, it's still going to cool to 80 degrees. It's going to cool or equalize to the ambient air temperature. So if it does get to 80, it's going to take a while for that meat to cool to 80. And then by the time it does hit 80, it's going to not be 80 anymore. You know what I mean? It's going to be starting to get into the evening cycle, and then you got the night cycle. And, in the mountains, a lot of times the temperatures drop down into the 40s, maybe late 30s at night. And eventually that thing's going to cool off down to, 38, 40 degrees, 45 degrees. Then you're good to go. Then once it reaches maximum coolness, I try to make sure I protect it and keep it as cool as possible while I get it out of the mountains. So if that means bumping it down to a creek where it's usually 5 or 10 degrees cooler in the middle of the day, right on a creek channel, I'll stack some sticks over the top of a little creek or set it right in the shade right next to the water where it's as cool as possible. And I got probably up to 48 hours to get it out. So that, once you kill one, the clock's ticking, but if it's a normal fall day, you've got several days to get it out. If you take the right precautions to cool the meat off, keep it clean, keep it dry, and keep the insects off of it. Those are the big things. Use a quality game bag. I've always said, like, I've seen dudes driving $50,000 trucks and they have a $3 game bag. It's like, come on, you could spend a little more on a game bag. spend the $50 and get a tag bag or a caribou or black ovis or whatever. There's a lot of high quality game bags out there, and you can reuse them, and they work better than those 50-cent cheesecloth things that some people use.
Yeah. I think the ones I use are the Alaskan game bags. I've used them.
Those are great.
Yeah, I used them for a couple whitetails, and they're the elk ones, so they were huge on whitetails. But afterwards, I just put them in a sink, and I was able to clean them out, and they're like new again.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. If you buy decent game bags, you can use them year after year. I want to say I have put at least 4 or 5 bulls in a set of caribou game bags. And the only reason I'm not putting more bulls in them is because I ended up giving some meat away and I never got my game bags back. So I think I had some tag bags. They're made in Alaska, but they're kind of that synthetic, fairly breathable, tough, like a kind of a synthetic bag that are washable, reusable. And I've put a lot of critters in those as well.
Okay. So when you
boning. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say when you take them off, you're taking the quarters off. You're putting them in the game bags right away to hang them.
Yeah, a lot of times. So I'll pop a quarter off, and I will. If I'm by myself, I'll just kind of roll the bag down, kind of like a condom.
Yep.
And get the tip of the quarter in there. And then roll it up, and then I'll pack it over to my meat pole and suspend it off my meat pole and just let it hang and blow in the breeze for as long as possible. And the reason I like to keep them on the bone as long as possible is that I feel that my meat comes out a little more tender if it ages just a little bit on the bone, because it keeps those muscle groups stretched out from like tendon to tendon. If you cut it off the bone, it kind of all shrivels up right away, and it just becomes a little more tougher and a little chewier, more rubbier. I think boned out meat. I don't know. This is just my opinion and just what I've noticed, and I could be wrong. Maybe I'm just imagining it, but it seems like when I bone out even younger bulls, they're a little more chewier than I think they should be. But if they go through the rigor process on the bone, then bone it, they seem to be a little better.
Okay.
So I remember rigor sets in. I don't remember how long it takes for it to go through that rigor. So as long as rigor sets in and it's a while after that, then if you bone it out, then it tends to not be as chewy.
Interesting.
To be a little more tender.
Okay.
So if I'm close to the truck, if it's like a 2-mile pack or something, I'll throw a quarter in with the bone in. They just ride better. They just they don't ball up. You don't have a giant ball of meat kind of trying to slide out of your load shelf or trying to slide into the bottom of your pack, however you're carrying your meat out. The quarters it's more compact. It stretches the center of gravity. It gets it closer to your back, and it moves it sort of up your spine, kind of, and close to your spine. It just keeps the load riding a little closer to your backbone, and it carries better, I think.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yep. No, that definitely makes sense. But
I want to say, if you take a leg bone out, you're only losing like maybe 5 pounds of load. 5 to 8 pounds, 5 to 7, I think. I've weighed a few leg bones, and I want to say they're about 5 to 7 pounds, depending on the size of the bull. So I don't know. It's not to me. It's like it's not that big of a deal if it's a shorter trip.
And if you're taking it, say you pack it out and you're with a bunch of guys and you have other tags to fill, so you're taking it out and you're going to go to a butcher shop or something along those lines. If you're going to have them cut up the meat, say you killed it early in the trip, then from the ones I've talked to, they prefer to have it on the bone. Is that correct?
A lot of them do. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So so they can age it a little bit longer too when it is on the bone.
Yep.
So as soon as you start making all those cuts, you're creating more surface area that bacteria can start to grow on. So they can't dry age them as long when they're boned out. They just tend to get a little more slimy faster for whatever reason, just, bacteria exposure. to the surface of the meat. So if it's on the bone, yeah, it's there's less surface of the meat's exposed to it, and it can last longer in the cooler, and it can age longer. And the longer it ages, the more tender it's going to be.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And but it sounds like for the most part, like on your bivy hunts and stuff, do you eventually bone them out or like before you pack it out?
Yeah, I do. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I do, just because sometimes if it's a smaller bowl, I can fit more than just 1/4, in my pack if it's boned out. I don't know. It's just, I can throw a couple extra chunks in and get it out, and maybe 3 loads instead of 4 if I'm by myself.
Yeah.
Or, 2 loads with a buddy, get it down to at least a trail or something, and then get the camp out plus a big load. So it's just all, scenario dependent. But boning, if the last bull I killed way back in backpack hunting, it was a long ways. I mean, it was dang near 4,000 vertical feet out of there.
Oh.
And it was probably 6 miles, 6.5 miles. So it was a long ways. And carrying a bone that far, it's not, it doesn't make any sense if you can just pop it out and leave it up there.
Yeah, man, that sounds pretty rough. And so do you like when you're loading, okay, so now you either boned it out or you left the bone in, either way, when you go to load your pack, do you like packs that have like an external meat shelf, so basically putting the meat between the frame and the bag, or do you like throwing it inside the bag?
I prefer a load shelf and squeezing it between the bag and the frame.
Mm-hmm.
I've done both. Just like the new Sitka packs, they have an internal load shelf, meat shelf inside of the bag, and I've packed bloody elk quarters in that thing with all my camping gear around it. But I've made sure that the meat is cooled off, and then I'll slip it into a dry bag, just so it's a blood-proof bag, basically, to hold the meat.
Yep.
And then I'll pack. That way blood's not dripping down in all your camping gear. Some guys don't care. They'll just like shove their sleeping bag right around their bloody elk quarter. But I prefer to keep my gear not covered in blood.
Yeah.
But I do prefer the load shelf with the bag that detaches from the frame. It just tends to be easier to keep things clean.
Yep.
All your gear clean.
So,
but there are some limitations with that too. A lot of times the compression straps that you really have to just crank on some of those straps to hold your meat load in place, which can compress all your gear in your pack. It makes it hard to get some of your gear out at times. If you need to get something out of there as you're packing your camp and your meat out, if you need to get in to get your water filter or some food or whatever, sometimes it can be a bugger.
Mm-hmm.
But it generally keeps everything fairly clean inside. But I usually hunt with a pack I'm capable of hauling something out, even when I'm just day hunting from the truck.
Yeah. So the only experience that I have is packing out whitetails, and I've used both. I had my Kafaru that I had the external frame and the load shelf, and then the Sitka Mountain Hauler 6200 where I put it inside. And so I agree with what you were saying. Again, this is a much smaller animal, but it seemed like the Sitka one rode a little bit better, like it wasn't shifting around as much there, but it was kind of weird at first putting it inside the bag with your other stuff. But what I did do is I had Sitka has like a big roll top, like dry bag that you can stuff all your stuff in. So that's what I used. And then I have like a couple other little, like my kill kit and everything's in like a Kafaru pull out. So they're like a waterproof bag too. And so that helps. But, but still your inside of your bag is, he has a lot of blood in it. And if you have a car wash or something close, if you can get to something like that, if you're going back into town, then that's not a big deal. Those rinse off really easily. Where like a Cordura type bag, like my Kafaru was tougher to clean from it, but it wasn't inside the bag either. So, you know, there's trade-offs with both.
Yep. No, I agree. Yeah. That Sitka 6200, that Mountain Hauler 6200, it carries a big load really well.
Mm-hmm.
It handles, and that's an internal load sling. It's inside of the main bag. And I packed a quarter out, like a boned out quarter, and a full camp out with that pack one year when it was first introduced. Actually, it was a little before it was introduced. I had got the good fortune of testing one out.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a little big and maybe a little clunky, like walking around with it empty, because the frames are kind of wide. It's kind of wide.
Yep.
And it's a little tall. It's a little tall on me. I mean, it's like a 26-inch frame, I think. But man, when you throw a giant load in there, it is really stable, and it handles it really well, and it's comfortable.
Yeah.
And I can say the same thing is about the Mountain Hauler 4000. It's a little smaller version. The frame isn't as wide, so it doesn't feel as clunky when you're walking around with it in day mode. But it handles a fairly sizable load as well in that internal load shelf. I don't know if you'd get a full camp in that thing with an elk quarter, just because the internal volume's not there. But you can get quite a bit of gear in there. I used that in Utah last year.
Okay.
And I liked it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would recommend that pack to people who are doing 3, 4, 5 day backpack trips. I'd use that pack over the 6200.
Yeah.
Given the option.
And that's what I got the 4000 this year, and I like the pocket layouts better on it, and it definitely compressed a little bit better for day mode. But the pockets and being able to have that U-zip to get in the whole inside of the pack without going in through the top, I thought that was really a nice change, because that's what I loved about my Kafaru was it zipped right down the center. I had the Reckoning pack, and I was able to access everything, where this still has those external. I just like the pocket layouts a little better on the 4000.
Yes, I totally agree. Adding that zipper was key. I like the external pockets for organization. I do like the top lid on the 6200 a little better. Mm-hmm. I like that split pocket. But whatever, that's kind of personal preference. But yeah, it's a great pack.
Yeah.
It's great. I use that a fair bit, and I use a bunch of. I used to own a Kafaru. I'm not super familiar with them. They're newer models, but I had one of their earlier models, and it was great. But I do a lot of pack testing for rock slides, so I end up with packs kind of rotating in and out of my house pretty frequently. But I've never really gotten a hold of any Kafaru stuff for testing.
Yeah.
There's other rock slide riders that are got better rocks or better Kafaru connections, but Stone Glacier, MR, Sitka, Seek Outside. I got a Seek Outside pack I'm just finishing a review on right now.
Okay.
So yeah, there's a ton of good packs out there. There's a lot of good equipment for people wanting to go elk hunting, backcountry elk hunting.
Yep.
It's like the golden years.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of good gear. I mean, I've just messed around with some different packs, and I've liked a lot of them. I love my Kafaru. It's a little heavier than I would like. I mean, I was running the tactical frame, which is one of their heavier ones. I got it for tree stand hauling. A lot of times it stayed stiffer. But then like the newer Sitka packs, the mountain haulers they're light years above their old Bivy style packs. And
yeah,
I've never used a Stone Glacier, but I've heard so many good things about those as well.
Yep.
So
yeah, they're less pockets on the Stone Glacier. So if you're a pocket guy, it might not be the pack for you. But they're lightweight, they're trim, they carry a heavy load pretty well. There's trade-offs to all of them. There's pluses and minuses. But, if you pick up any of the top of the line packs these days, you're going to have a something that's super nice, super comfortable, and capable of doing pretty much whatever you want.
So, Josh, once you get the meat back to the truck, I guess this is the next section of the meat care.
Oh yeah, that's where we were headed.
Yeah,
we were headed there.
Yeah, so did I, and this is something that is like. So I was talking about with you trying to fit everything into my truck and going through that, and I'm looking at cooler selections and stuff, and basically it's what I have. I have a few different coolers I'm going to bring along, but how are you going about packing your meat into the coolers and the whole process of the truck?
Yeah, so when I go on a trip, so I have the good fortune of having a giant Yeti Tundra 210, and that thing will swallow a full boned out mature bull elk, and with ice in the bottom of it. So if you need to keep your meat cool back at camp, and 2 or 3 or 4 days or something like that, I wouldn't keep it more than 4 days, even in a cooler on ice if possible, without getting it to a processor or processing it yourself. Those things are awesome. It's unbelievable how good the coolers are these days. What I do is I have a duffel bag that I shove full of synthetic ice, like little ice packs, little blue things you throw in your freezer, and they freeze solid, and supposedly they stay frozen longer. But I'll fill a duffel bag just full of them, zip it up, throw it in a smaller cooler, and then I'll throw that cooler inside of that Yeti, and that stuff will stay frozen in a brick in there for a week, easily, if you don't open the lid.
Yeah.
If you are back in the backcountry for 4 or 5 days, you can come out and you've got ice right there in your Yeti. It's already pre-cooled, and you can just pull that out, and I'll throw, if my meat's cool, I will throw the ice blocks on the bottom. I'll maybe throw a piece of cardboard down on top of it, and then I'll put stack the meat on top of that. And then I might throw a couple ice blocks on top as well. Close the lid, don't open it until you get to the processor. I mean, maybe crack it open in the cool of the morning or something, just to feel your meat temperature and smell it, make sure it still smells fresh and clean. But yeah, when I'm back at the truck, it goes into a big cooler. And last year when I was hunting, kind of south of here, quite a ways. I had a special permit in a different unit, and I killed a bull. I think it was on a Thursday, maybe. And no, it was a Friday. Killed it, got it back to camp, hung it up, got it all cooled out, and then I was going to run them into the just the full quarters. I was going to run them into the meat processor, which was like probably an hour away. And I drove in there, and they're not open there's no cell service where I was at either. So I had to drive into town basically, and to find out that they're closed on Saturday and Sunday. So I came back, hung them up back in camp, boned them out, and that's when I put them on some ice in my cooler and kept them there for another couple days in that cooler. And then I got them back in on Monday.
Okay.
Early. Dropped them off. Oh yeah, they were great. It was cold and perfect.
So if you took it, say, full quarters out, and you weren't planning on boning it, taking it to the processor, and you were going to drive straight into town, assuming that they're open, would you need to throw those in a cooler, or can you kind of just throw them in your truck bed in the game bags?
It depends on the temperature. If it's like really hot out and the back of your truck is exposed to the sun and it's hot metal, I wouldn't throw them just in the back of my truck bed.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it was like a 15-minute or 20-minute drive down to where you're headed. But
yeah.
If you had to drive an hour and a half, no, I wouldn't throw them in the back of my truck. You might be fine, but I wouldn't want to take that risk.
Yeah.
I mean, you spent all that effort to get that thing out of the mountains, keep it clean, keep the bugs off, get it cooled out. It's like, I don't know. I wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah.
So I would try to throw it in a cooler, or I would wrap it in an old sleeping bag. You know, if you don't have a big fancy roto-molded cooler, bring a couple old crappy sleeping bags and some cardboard boxes, and lay them in those cardboard boxes and wrap them up in those sleeping bags, because that's, it'll insulate it from the heat. And once you get those quarters cooled out, then it's easy to keep them cool. It's tough to change that temperature, especially if you keep them insulated.
Yeah.
So wrap them in some old sleeping bags and then drive them into town. You can always throw those things in the laundromat and clean them up, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
So I would steer clear of just throwing them in the back of my truck unless I had some foam mats back there or foam sleeping pads or something like that in an old sleeping bag I can throw over them, or some old blankets, something to keep them somewhat insulated and keep the sun from beating down on them and keep that hot truck bed from making the meat kind of reheat.
And you have to worry about, I guess, dust too, as I'm thinking about it. Even know how much sealed your truck bed is, you always get dust in there. I tried sealing it and doing all that, and it still gets, dust inside. But so the reason why I was asking with that is, say you have a few smaller coolers, if they were going to fit. 'Cause I'll have my buddy's bringing a Yeti 110, and then I have an Orion 85, and I think and I'm borrowing another cooler that's like a 120 quarts, a roto-molded one, a Bison cooler, I think. So I just didn't know if they'd all fit, if like a full quarter, if you'd have to bone them out, and just trying to gauge that. I guess you could take some measurements and figure that out ahead of time, but
yeah, I'm not 100% sure on the sizes of some of those, but yeah, it might be feasible. You might have to jump and sit on one of the lids of one of them to get them to close, but
yeah. So that's a good problem to have. You'd figure it out at that point.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, that's kind of some of the, again, questions I had surrounding the meat care, and that's something that I've never talked to anybody about, and I don't hear it a whole lot on podcasts talking about that. And like you said, that's what we're there for. That's what we're bringing out. We're there obviously for the whole adventure and the fun of elk hunting, but that's what you're bringing home with you.
Right. No, absolutely.
And I guess to take that one more step, I don't want to keep you on here all night, Josh, but just as far as like with the head, if you were planning on doing like a European mount or something like that with it, say you're successful on a nice bull, are you skinning out, are you taking off the hide and everything from the head in the field and just bringing out the head with some, light meat on it, or how does that look?
Yeah, I tend to, if I'm going to European something, I will skin the head out in the field. I'll try to pull off as much, especially if I'm in the backcountry and it's a fairly, long pack out. I will skin as much as I can off of it. So I'll skin all the hide off. I will cut the bottom jaw off as well, and the tongue, and that will eliminate a big part of the weight. And then, of course, I'll cut the eyeballs out most of the time. Jordan Gill, he told me as a photographer, it just looks weird with eyeballs and a skinned out head. He said it looks a little more aesthetic with the eyeballs cut out. as gruesome as that sounds, but I think he's right.
Yeah.
So I'll cut the eyeballs out, and that's about all I do. But if you're in a chronic wasting disease area, there's certain regulations that you need to follow as well. I know it's kind of been a hot topic recently in certain states about chronic wasting disease. Like some places, you're not allowed to transport certain parts of animals outside of that zone. That includes heads with brains inside of it and spinal column. So, if that's the case, or any flesh on the skulls in some places. So sometimes you might have to go to a pressure washer, car wash, and scramble the inside of that brain with a screwdriver or something, and then pressure wash it out of the skull, kind of a deal. Might have to find somebody that could quickly boil the meat off of it, that kind of thing. So I would say look into the local regulations where you're hunting and make sure that's not a requirement.
That's a good point.
So you're kind of prepared for it, yeah, if it does happen.
Well, I know, for whitetails, that's a big thing. Like when in Ohio and stuff like that, you have to look at those regulations for CWD areas, and even some areas that aren't considered CWD areas still might have those regulations.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I need to look closely in Wyoming, because I do believe Wyoming has CWD in parts of the state, but I don't know if it's where I'm going. And I know they have some regulations surrounding that. Idaho, I don't think they have it. Pretty sure they don't. Mm-hmm. Montana has some areas. Actually, CWD was just found here in our whitetails this spring. I don't know if you heard that.
No, I didn't.
Oh, man, just a kick to the stomach.
Yeah.
When I found that out. Oh, it's a bad deal. And they found quite a few diseased animals. But anyway, so yeah, that's kind of why it's, fresh on the top of my mind. Just, all the CWD talk around here and the regulations for the zone where it's found, and they're still trying to figure out how far it's spread, but there's some specific verbiage and regulations you need to follow if you kill any ungulates in those zones. So I think people just need to be aware of that, if possible. If it's there, take precautions with it.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And so one thing that you said about like the meat processor, one step about being closed, one step that I took this year, and I took last year too, but I created a list of areas that, like, say, so I'll have like a meat processors that are in an area listed, their hours, their address, their phone number, and then the same thing with grocery stores, places I can get extra coolers, the whole bit. And I just I print off a copy and keep it in my truck just for, reference for that. And it's not always going to be that way. They might say they're going to be open and not be, but that's just another helpful step to take a little bit of stress off you. Yeah,
no, that's a great idea. That's a great tip.
Mm-hmm.
If you can find that stuff out ahead of time and have everything planned, you can adjust if things kind of fall through.
Yep.
Great idea.
Well, cool. Josh, is there anything else that we're missing there? I think we covered quite a bit of stuff.
Yeah, we really did. We covered a lot of elk hunting stuff. I don't know if people can tell, but I'm a little passionate about it. I love it. It's my favorite time of the year. I tend to spend a lot of time out there doing it, and you get beat down. It's tiring. It's hard work, but man, it's fun too. So one thing, I guess one little last tip about boning meat, since it's still kind of in the back of my head. One of the best things I found for boning meat is a fillet knife. Throw in a really flexible bladed fillet knife, and it makes your boning jobs way easier. You can pull basically the whole muscle off in one chunk without just hacking chunks off.
Yeah.
So, if people go at it and try to take as big a chunk of muscle off as possible, you use a boning knife. It makes it way easier.
That's a great tip. And also, I mean, that's something. Do you carry that in your pack with you, or is that something you keep at the truck?
No, it goes in my pack.
Okay.
Yeah. So if I kill one and it dictates that it needs, to be boned out, then I have it with me. So yeah, it's one of my hunting knives that I carry with me everywhere I go. So
really good tip.
Yeah, and strive for one chunk of meat per quarter. You can take the entire hind quarter off in one chunk of meat if you just kind of bone it right. So, and the front shoulder is the same thing. Just make one incision on one part of the blade, and then you can just wrap it around. So I guess that's a goal for people to strive for, is just try to keep the muscle groups as large and as intact as possible. Because if you are taking it to a processor, he doesn't have to try to guess what muscle group he's looking at and what kind of cut to make out of it. So if it's like a big ham with just the bone out of it, he knows, oh, these are all going to be rounds. But if it's a ham that's cut into 5 pieces, you're like, what is this?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Roast. He's getting a roast.
Yep. And then he's going to look at you and maybe, oh, there's an upcharge here. That's not what you said. Well, that's what you get.
Right. Yep. Anyway, yeah, that was sort of kind of the tail end of my thoughts on meat care.
Cool. All right, Josh. Yeah. Well, so that's awesome. I'm pumped to see how your trips go with Montana around home and everything, and then down in Wyoming this year. So I think it's gonna be a good year.
Yeah, and likewise, I'm excited for you're coming out to Idaho. I'll be looking for some Insta stories from you.
Yeah,
at some point.
Yeah, whenever we have service and everything, I'll definitely send you a text with a photo there.
Heck yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, likewise. I'll do the same. I'll keep you kind of in the loop if possible on how things are going. So
yeah, especially
hopefully the picture will be some big dead bulls.
Yeah, especially when it's like 7 days in and my emotions are all over the place, and you send me a picture of a dead bull, that'll make me get going again.
Right on. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it sounds like we're going to be adjacent states.
Yep.
Probably not too far away from one another. So yeah, well, good luck to you, man. I appreciate you having me on again.
Yeah, Josh, I was just going to say, where can people find some more of your stuff at? And, if they want to look into some of your gear reviews and everything else, and your Instagram handle?
Oh, yeah. So I guess people can find me on Rockslide. If you jump on, get in the forums, you can look me up. My user handle's just Josh Boyd. You could probably look me up on the homepage. You can find my articles that I've written on there, gear reviews from tents to rifles to backpacks. And then also people can find me in the social media world on Instagram. My handle is just Josh_Boyd_MT, as in Montana. And I try to keep that page, I don't post a ton of stuff, but I try to keep a relevant post every couple of weeks if possible on kind of what I'm doing, what I find interesting, and just some awesome scenery and what excites me visually. So yeah, people can check me out there.
Cool, man. Well, hey, again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast again. I'm excited to catch up with you after our season's end and we have some stories to tell.
Yes. Yeah, probably see each other at ATA, I'm guessing.
Yep, that'll probably be, you're exactly right. Oh, man.
Right on.
Well, anyways, Josh, again, good talking to you, and you take care.
All right, you too, Bo.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Bo Martonic. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.